It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeneuve.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, Flo. So today we're going to focus on something that is arguably part of France's DNA alongside wine and cheese. We're talking about protesting. Now, France's love of what we call la manifestation has really been in the spotlight recently, of course, with the Yellow Vest movement.
Absolutely. Now, demonstrations happen all over the world. It's not a particularly French thing, but the French have made la manif into an art form, I guess you could say, and it happens a lot. In fact, there are on average 10,000 demonstrations a year in France, and demonstrating is kind of a rite of passage for young people. It's a moment when you kind of discover politics, and people often remember with nostalgia their first manifestation.
And it's really a part of French culture. The whole history of France has been marked with massive demonstrations dating to even before the French Revolution.
There are way too many to mention in this show. We could do a whole show on the history of manifestation. In recent history, though, people remember the liberation of Paris was a massive demonstration. Of course, the demonstrations of May 68. There's so many reasons why people demonstrate in France, often for or against a law, social change, for protecting people's rights, also when we win the World Cup, of course, and in defense of French values. In fact, the biggest known demonstration in French history was very recently. It was on January 11th, 2015, so 3.7 million people took to the streets across the country to pay tribute to the victims of the Charlie Hebdo attack and in defense of freedom of expression.
Despite France's long history of demonstrations, it's not enshrined in the Constitution like going on strike is.
And that being said, though, there are very strict laws that leave little room for improvisation when it comes to demonstrating. So how does it work, Jeannie? If you want to organize a manifestation in France, well, you have to declare it beforehand to local authorities. Now, the timing can be different whether you're in Paris or outside of Paris, but you have to declare it beforehand, and that goes for any kind of demonstration, so a political march, but you see these people rollerblading here as well. That happens on a weekly basis in France, and that is considered a manifestation. And the same goes for like the techno parade or the gay pride. You have to declare it first.
Now, in any demonstration in France, the same question always comes up. How many people participated? And there can really be a huge disparity between the numbers.
It's kind of like what happened after Trump's inauguration. The difference between official figures and the figures of organizers can be so radically different. It can almost seem comical how different they are, but a lot of it is at stake, especially the success or not of a demonstration. So how do you count how many people are in the streets? Well, there are several different methods that are more or less reliable. For instance, there's the timing method where you actually time the first 100 people in a demonstration, and then you time the whole demonstration, and then you do the math. That is what some trade unions use, for instance. The police, however, use a different method that's a little bit more rustic, I guess you could say. They basically put police officers in a spot overlooking the demonstration, and they count in real time the people going by, 10 by 10. They use a click counter, the same one that you might see bouncers use in a nightclub, for instance, and then they check the result, though, with a video. It's not perhaps the most glamorous part of their job. Take a listen.
We count everyone, in the street, on the sidewalk. We have two lookout spots. At each spot, two officers are in charge of counting. It's not the most glorious part of the job, but they do it conscientiously, with determination and loyalty.
With the Yellow Vest movement, it's been particularly hard to count the number of people taking part. First of all, many of the demonstrations weren't authorized, and then they take place in roundabouts around the country. There aren't really any leaders of this movement, so it's a real headache to count how many people are taking part.
Now, the Yellow Vest movement also brought to light a side effect of demonstrations, the so-called Kesser.
And this is a phenomenon that is by no means specific to the Yellow Vest movement, it must be said. It's our word du jour. Kesser is literally someone who breaks something, who guesses something. And now, Kesser are not necessarily associated with the demonstrators. They pretty much take advantage of the situation, of the excitement around a demonstration, to break things, to fight with the police, to loot shops, to wreak havoc, essentially. And to crack down on these Kesser, the government has been pushing through some very controversial legislation that would include, for instance, banning people suspected of being hooligans from taking part in demonstrations. It's called the Loi anti-Kesser, and it has drawn criticism from across the political spectrum, including within the majority. Now, the government stopped short of creating a kind of a blacklist of Kesser, which critics said would have seriously endangered the right to demonstrate.
It's essentially making a list of people using vague criteria. Basically, anyone that authorities believe might disrupt public order. It's extremely dangerous with respect to freedom of expression and the right to demonstrate.
The Yellow Vest movement has also put the spotlight on police violence, it must be said, and the use of crowd control dispersing grenades, which are very controversial. However, that is something we would have to explore in another show.
All right, let's take a look at the bigger picture here now, once again, in regard to demonstrations. How effective are they in France?
Well, taking to the streets can be very effective in certain cases to foster change or to make the government back down. For instance, if you look at recent French history, controversial reforms on Social Security in 1995 and work contracts in 2006 were abandoned after massive demonstrations. Sometimes, though, demonstrations don't actually stop change. For instance, the anti-gay marriage protesters marching under the banner of La Manif pour tous didn't stop gay marriage from becoming legal in 2012. That being said, though, the Manif pour tous seriously shook up the French political landscape, and so I guess it was effective in a different way. Perhaps the most important role of these manifs in French society is to act as a valve, to essentially let people blow off some steam before everything explodes.
Flo, thank you so much for that look at the manifestation, the demonstrations in France, truly a part of French culture. Don't forget, if you have other questions about France or the French, you can always send Flo a tweet at Flo Villeneuve.